Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday As Bill Sees It meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it's with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Harold L., who's come from Missouri, who's come to share for about 40 minutes, after which we will open up for general sharing, or if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Harold. It's wonderful to have you here. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Harold. I'm an alcoholic. Can you hear me? I know it's evening for some of you, afternoon for some of you, who knows what for some of you, but for me, it's 7 a.m. in the morning, and I'm grateful to be here. My sobriety date is April 7th, 1987. I'm a proud member of a strong Three Legacy home group here in St. Louis, Missouri, called AA on the Rocks. We meet on Wednesday nights, and I come from a great line of sponsorship. And I say all those things, especially for the new person, because those are absolutely critical in how my life turned out, to have those things, to have a Three Legacy home group, to have Three Legacy sponsorship, and to be a part of that has shaped my life and allowed me to become the person I am today and experience and have a storybook life, basically, because of that action. So thank you for the invitation to come and be here with you this morning or this afternoon or this evening. And the reading, they asked me to pick a reading, and I went to some of my indexes, and I just pulled up February 9th, and that was the reading for Bill Sees It for today. So that's the reading I shared with your team to talk about today. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time in 1979 through the Department of Corrections, and I was inside a correctional facility when a couple members brought AA into that facility. And that was my introduction to AA. I was far from conceding that I was an alcoholic, had no concept of what that meant. I didn't understand alcoholism in any form or shape as an illness or a malady or any of that, just so far removed from that. But it was an adequate demonstration. I think it's on page 105 of Bill Sees It. Right in the middle of the page, there's an excerpt from one of Bill's letters, and it's titled Chief Responsibility. And I'm paraphrasing, but it says that our chief responsibility is to deliver an adequate demonstration of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's so important because that, even though I didn't really want to hear what they had to say, or nor did I think it was relevant to me, their presentation, their demonstration was definitely adequate enough that I was open to it when the time came to sit with you people for the first time and really engage with you. So I think that's really important. I'm sure this group's going to honor that today and be an adequate demonstration. I know we have a lot of new people here, so welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're going to be talking about blockage today and really getting in, what I would say is the root of the issue with our malady, and I'll talk a little bit about that. When I was incarcerated at that time, I was in on another charge, and I had a parole officer and I had a prosecutor who understand the malady that I was suffering from way deeper and more informative than I ever did. But they were generous enough and merciful enough to offer me a plea bargain. And the plea bargain pretty much went like this: we can charge you with this new offense, and we can revoke your parole and send you back to where you came from for 2.5 more years at least. Or you can go into this treatment center for 30 days. Now, I quit school when I was 13, but I had enough mathematics in me to know that 30 days was a heck of a lot shorter than 2.5 years. So that was a no-brainer, and I took the plea bargain. I went to treatment for the first time. By this time, it's 1980. And I sat in that space, and I was by far the youngest person in that room. There wasn't that many people. I could look at one screen here, and that's about how many people was probably in that treatment center. But I was by far the youngest person, and so far removed from conceding that I was powerless over alcohol. A buzzword back then was chemical dependent in 1980, where I was from. And there was a little bit I could concede to, but the idea hadn't really danced real hard with King Alcohol at that point. I danced, but I didn't really dance the way I would dance with King Alcohol and fall in love with King Alcohol in the time after that. But when I got out, a couple of guys picked me up, and I jumped in the back of a pickup. We could ride in the back of pickups back then in the States. And they handed me a big plastic jug of grain alcohol mixed with, I don't know, fruit punch or something. They called it jungle juice, and they handed me that. And I was drinking that within minutes after leaving the treatment center. And I had this shiny coin for 30 days. I remember going down to the river, went to a big party. It was summertime on the river, and took that coin by the end of the night, went down and skipped it across the river, pounded my chest, made some rebel yell like I had victory over corrections and victory over treatment, and like I escaped, the great escape. And little did I know and how much delusion I was really under at that point. But I wouldn't, my life, I would continue to drink and burn my life to the ground until 1987. And I found myself back in another cage, in a lot of trouble. And it was in that cell, whatever my faith was up to that point, I wasn't ignorant to the concept of God. I was introduced to it. But I had no faith, I had no belief. I was definitely suffering from the delusion of spiritual disqualification. I felt disqualified in every aspect of being a human being you could be, but definitely with some kind of higher power or God. But I was desperate enough to get on my knees in that cell and say a prayer. And that prayer is a prayer I would call the prayer of surrender. It's a prayer I heard a million times in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the prayer simply was, God help me. And from that moment till now, almost 38 years later, I've never found it necessary to drink again. And the big $1 million question is, what was the difference with that prayer and all the other prayers I ever said? Because I said a lot of prayers. You probably did too. Even if you claim to be atheist, agnostic, you definitely cry out when the heat is on, when the two-ton elephant is sitting on you and there's no way to get out from underneath it. You're pleading to anything for help and mercy. And I said this prayer a lot. God, if you get me out of this, I'll never do it again. I'm sure you said some version of that prayer many times in your life. And if you're really alcoholic, you probably added this to it. And this time, I really mean it because you burnt that prayer into the ground, right? So what was the difference between that prayer and all the other prayers that I ever said? And I think our book calls it out. It says that God doesn't make too hard of turns for those who honestly seek God. And the difference, I think, with all those other prayers and this one was that it was honest. It was desperate. It was purely out of self-centeredness, but it was honest. I need help. I can't do this no more. And because of that, it was my first step coming back to you people. I went all the way back. This is going back to that reference to page 105 of Bill Season. I went all the way back to northern Missouri where I was at in treatment in 1980. Lots of help here in St. Louis. St. Louis is a pretty big place. But I was familiar with that up there. And I needed a piece of paper to stand in front of the judge and plead for mercy. And that was my motivation for going and getting help. Not to be sober the rest of my life, not to get in recovery. I had no idea even what that meant. But I went there. And I went there with a desire not to drink. I didn't have a desire to know God or a desire to practice what we're going to talk about today. But I definitely had a desire to quit living that lifestyle that I was living. And I went there. And a guy with only 2.5 months of sobriety, he would be my Ebby, if you would, came in and befriended me. He was my age now. And he wasn't there to walk me through the steps. He was just starting that journey himself, or he wasn't there to be my sponsor. But he was there to be a lifelong friend. And his demonstration and walking shoulder to shoulder with me and investing his time and energy in me saved my life. And he took me to outside meetings. And I remember going into my first outside meeting. If you're new tonight, you might have these kind of questions. But I went in and sat in this meeting. I wasn't happy to be there. The idea of not drinking or being sober or recovery sounded very punitive to me. I don't know if it does to you, but it did to me because I didn't understand what it meant. It just sounded like you are being sentenced to never drink again. That's what that felt like. It's what it sounded like. It's how I interpreted it. And so when I went into that meeting and sat down, I asked the guy sitting next to me, how long do we got to come here? How long do we got to do this stuff? I mean, I just want to know how long it is. Is it 6 months? Is it 2 years? How long? So I can kind of wrap my mind around it and just be prepared to exit, just like being in treatment for, when do I get out of here? And the guy looked at me kind of puzzled and he says, until you want to. Well, that wasn't good news because I didn't want to be there that night, much less the next night. And I darn sure didn't want to be there when I looked like that guy. And guess what? 38 years later, I look like that guy. So that's how that comes full circle. But I came back to St. Louis and I didn't go to AA. I just didn't. I didn't understand this design for living. I didn't believe the 12 steps would transform my life. I didn't understand the spiritual formula that we just read, that when you put the spiritual ahead of the material, you straighten out. I didn't understand that. I was so inflicted, and I think most human beings are, with individualism, consumerism, materialism. It drove my life. Call me crazy, but I think I could be a little bit more spiritual if I had a few $100s in my pocket and a better looking girl in a car with that wasn't held together by bumper stickers and was legal and a legal driver's license. Call me nuts, and if I wasn't on parole or living in a basement of an old beat up house, I think I could be a little bit more spiritual. I don't know what you think, but that was my mindset. I just cannot buy into the program of recovery as we lay it out today. Because I never experienced it and I felt so disqualified to even participate in it. But I finally got the courage through the prodding of this Ebby in my life to finally go to my meeting. And he would say things like, Harold, your life depends on you being sober. Your life depends on you attending Alcoholics Anonymous and becoming a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as much as I didn't want that to be a true statement, I knew in my heart of hearts that was a true statement. I didn't want it to be, but I knew it was. And so I finally got the courage. And it took me probably close to 90 days before I finally came to my first meeting. But I came in, and there's three types of people in my experience that come to AA. There's those who make it happen, there's those who watch it happen, and then there's those who don't know what's happening at all, right? And I've been all three of those cats. I absolutely had no clue what was going on when I got here. Zero. And I sure watched it happen for a long time. And what do I mean by that? I participated. The fellowship kept me alive. The fellowship kept me connected to you. So I don't want to water down the concept of fellowship because it was so important in my life. I was a rock and roll drummer, so I got involved with some musicians, and I played music, and I had a sober band, and I played on sober softball teams, and I went to sober dances, and I did everything sober, but in community and building lifelong friendships that would save my life ultimately. But I wasn't engaging the work, the principles to live by, the 12 steps. And forward to the 12 and 12, and I'm paraphrasing, but it says that I think it's the best definition of the 12 steps, but it says the 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, if practiced as a way of life, will expel the compulsion to drink and lead to a life where you become happy and usefully whole. Philosophically, I can say yes to that. But to get through the barriers of self and self-reliance and delusion, whole different story for that to really penetrate into my soul and get there. But philosophically, it made sense. But until I believe we come to the end of ourselves, will we ever come all the way in, sit all the way down and do this thing? We have to come to the end of ourselves. And for some people, that's when they put down the drink. They just come in and they're full of defeat and they're like, I'll do whatever you say. And they're in day one. But there's a lot of us that aren't. And I'm one of those people. I really believe King Alcohol was my problem. That once I separated myself from King Alcohol, that my life would just become like yours. It would just be transformed. And what adds to that delusion is when you do take King Alcohol out of your life and you've been abusing it and it's been full of consequences and you haven't been able to do it with impunity, you do get physically better, spiritually better, emotionally better, mentally better. You do at least a little bit, enough to add to the delusion. I don't need to do anything else. And sometimes there's not a sense of urgency to get to deal with the blockage, to deal with what I would call the spiritual separation, which I would say is our ultimate problem. It's separation. If you claim to be atheist and Gnostic, just take the word spiritual out and still call it separation. That I'm still disconnected from the world system and from you and from the people around me. I'm just disconnected. But if you fall into a more of a category of faith, then I would call it spiritual separation. And I believe I suffered from that long before I ever picked up a drink. I think that's what led to the magic of a King Alcohol having such a powerful effect on my life. But I hadn't dealt with that. And so you can only stay so long. And if you don't deal with, if this is the channel, Bill uses that language a lot, referencing the prayer of St. Francis. But if this is the channel, it was blocked before I ever started drinking. Full of secrets, full of doubts, full of delusions, full of twisted perceptions, full of lies, all that stuff filled this channel. And it blocked me from you. It blocked me from, I would say, God. And it blocked me from ever becoming who I was really believed to be created to be. And when I found King Alcohol, because of the pain, the emotional anguish, the disconnect, the discontent, going down the line, our book has a lot of language for it. The pain of that, when somebody said, here, have a drink of that, and the magic alcohol, it happened the very first time I really got intoxicated. It changed my life. I pretty much planted a flag right then and said, I'm going to do this with all this. And it's not just the effect of alcohol, it's the lifestyle. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I didn't say it out loud, but that's pretty much the pledge I made. That's the anthem I decided to lead by. I gave you my full allegiance because if I look back at my life, everything about me changed from that day forward. Who I ran with, how I talked, how I walked, everything. All my life centered to King Alcohol being right in the center of it, not realizing what the root cause was. And so when you get to step 3 in our big book, right after the ABCs of how it works, and I'm paraphrasing again, but it says, now we're at step 3, and what do we mean by that, and what do we do? It's a great question. And it says the first thing is that we have to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. We have to be convinced of that. meaning that we have to come to the end of ourselves. And for me, that took almost 3 years for me to get to that space, friends. It took almost 3 years. And I finally, through desperation, asked the guy to sponsor me. And he lived right down the street. I could walk to his house. I didn't have a car, I didn't have a license. And I went to his house and I sat with him and I asked him if he'd be my sponsor. He agreed to that. And he said, well, Harold, you've been around now for about 3 years. Tell me about your life. And I said, I'll tell you about my life, Roy. I'm 25 years old. I live in the basement of a house up the street. I don't have an education. I don't have a GED. I got a criminal record. I don't have a license. Probably never will have a driver's license ever again. I got a beat up car that's held together by bumper stickers that I can't legally drive, but I do anyway. That's where my life is, Roy. My life sucks. Take the word sucks, capitalize it, highlight it, italicize it, make a neon sign out of it. You can just flash it from the house. Harold's life sucks, sucks, sucks. That's where my life was. And I hadn't drank in 3 years. So the delusion that King alcohol was my problem was finally faded because I had drank in 3 years. And so I'm just not in a good space. And I laid out my drama and trauma to this guy, and this guy listened to me very gracefully, and he said, Harold, I hear everything you're saying, and I hope you're going to hear what I'm going to tell you. And friends, what he told me that evening changed my life. And it's as true. What he said to me that moment is as true that day as it is on February the 9th, 2025. And this is what he said. Harold, every single thing you have in your life right now, sitting at my kitchen table, you've attracted to you by the person that you become. And when you're man enough to own that truth is when your life's going to change. But until you can own that truth, this vicious cycle you're on, you're eventually going to drink again because you're not happy about your sobriety. I know you don't think so. That's part of the delusion, but you're like a candle blowing in the wind. Eventually the candle is going to go out and you will drink again. Or you're going to do what my dad did. My dad was an alcoholic, and at age 54, he took his life. That's how my dad stopped the pain. He just took his life. He couldn't deal with it anymore. So he said, you're going to do one or two things, man. You're either going to grow or you're going to go. And the $1 million question is, what do you want to do? And man, that's a great question. I think it's a question we all have to answer that question at some point, and not just once, but different seasons of our life. You're either going to grow or you're going to go. And I knew he was going to say, let's work the steps. But I just didn't understand how that was going to play in my life. And many of our grassroots old timers used to say it well. They used to say that the hardest thing anybody will ever do in recovery, and I believe it's true for Al-Anon, Alateen, AA, doesn't matter, is to take actions that we don't believe in. And I just didn't see how a moral inventory and sharing all my dirty little secrets and all my junk and then going back and sitting in front of somebody and trying to reconcile that and make amends for that, it was going to somehow or another change my life because, again, I was so driven by materialism and individualism and consumerism, and what you thought of me. What you thought of me paralyzed me. It had my whole life. That delusion of inequality, and especially here in the West, it just drives us. It drives the human being, but the alcoholic to the extreme. It just drives us. And not only do I need affirmation, I demand it. And you're not going to deliver on that. And that's part of the setup for the resentments is I have these expectations of how people are supposed to treat me, how people are supposed to respond to me. And it doesn't manifest that way. Guess what? It still don't manifest that way. And if I have expectations, it's gonna lead. As the old saying goes, unreasonable expectations are pre-made resentments. I'm already setting myself up for a conflict down the road when I have these expectations. But I knew none of that at this point. But I was ready. I was ready to sit down and do whatever. And he said, we're going to do an inventory, and we're going to start with resentments. Now, I grew up in the country, in the Ozark Mountains, what they call here in where I'm from, and that wasn't part of our language, resentment. So when he said we're going to make a list of your resentments, I'm like, I'm thinking, well, I must not have any because I don't even know what that is. And I'm being serious when I say that. So if you're sitting here listening to this and you're like, well, what does that even mean? Well, that's a great question because I didn't know I had the question, but I definitely had the question. And he goes, well, let me put it this way. And this really helped me. He says, let's get rid of the word resentment and let's change it with conflict. Have you ever had any conflict in your life? And I just smiled and said, man, I've had conflict my whole life. He goes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Let's write down the conflicts and let's start back as far as we can go. And so, if you're new here, that might help you wrestle with what we're talking about. Who was I sore at? Who am I bounced into? Who have I struggled with throughout my life? Well, that was easy to start writing that. And I just started writing it. And, but the problem is that we're so full of delusion. The delusion that, the delusion of equality drives our life. The delusion that I'm not alcoholic kills most of us. But then when we get into this work, we run right up against the delusion of victimization. The delusion that the reason I am who I am and where I am is because of you. And our book says it well. It says to conclude that others is wrong is about as far as most of us ever got, right? We never get past that. It's just victimization. And the problem with that is, well, do you know any happy victims? I know a lot of people. I've never met a happy victim yet. And I was definitely, victimization had me by the throat and against the wall. It owned the title to my soul. That's as far as I ever got. I'm here because of you. I'm here because of the DOC, because of stupid laws, because of stupid people, because my dad was never in my life. My mom was never in my life. I grew up on the streets. I spent almost my entire teenage life incarcerated into my 20s, on the run, beat up, sexually abused, physically abused, verbally abused, going down. I had a laundry list on my victimization list. It was a lot of co-signers and enablers to it. So it owned me. It owned the title to my soul. And if you're sitting here today, I can just tell you that you got to get rid of that victim card if you're going to stay here. And you're really going to experience. That's such a big part of getting unblocked here is you got to toss the victim card. And we need help to do that. And it starts with this work. This work is about unclogging this channel. This inventory is about taking the top off this thing for the first time and pulling out what's inside it. And it's scary to do that. It is scary to do that. Because I got a lot of secrets, and most of the secrets are around sexuality or crimes that I committed that I never got caught for. To be transparent, that's where my big secrets were at. And I just I wasn't ready to share any of that. I planned on taking that stuff to the grave with me. But the delusion is that's what was going to put me there. The very thing I was going to take to the grave was what was going to put me in the grave. And I didn't know that. And I didn't understand that, but I came to understand that. So we made this list of conflicts, and I did this whole work, and we got through with that part of it, and I handed it to my sponsor, and I said, "Here's my resentment list." And he looks at it, and he says, "I'm looking at this. Where's your dad on this list?" And I said, "My dad?" I said, "I never knew my dad. I only met him a few times. The last time I saw my dad is when he came from Oklahoma." When I was 14 to watch me be sentenced for the first time. That's the last time I saw my dad alive. I only saw him a handful of times. I'm less than this many times my whole life. So I never had a relationship with him. I hadn't seen him in decades, or just for a long time. It was a long time. And he goes, "So you don't have any conflict with that?" No, we never really had any problems, This is how delusional I am about all this stuff. I just don't see it for what it is. But as he challenged me on some questions and we started unpacking, he just asked me questions like, "Harold, did you ever tell any lies about your dad?" And I'm like, then I started thinking about it. Nobody ever asked me that before. But when I got honest, I'm like, yeah, I used to make up stories all the time. And kids would go, "Where's your dad? Who's your dad?" I'd tell them all kinds. He's a rodeo rider. He's a truck driver. He's a Marine. He's all these things. All the wish list things that I wish he might be. But he wasn't any of those things. He was one of us. He was just a broken person, broken alcoholic. Obviously had a lot of characteristics and good qualities about him that I never really got to know. But let me just put it this way. By the time we were done with that inventory, I had no conflict with my dad. When I got done, I had a great big hole in my soul, and it was in the shape of a dad. So that's the power of this inventory. This is the power of getting down to resentment. So, and the problem with resentments and why they're so hard to get rid of is because we create them. They're manifested between our ears. And I can promise you, and I mean this sincerely, if I had to go back to my original list of conflicts, and it's really no different, the formula is the same, but I'm just using this as an example. If I had to go back to that list today, I can guarantee at least a third, and that might be minimizing it, at least a third of those resentments were fabricated between my ears, my twisted perception on what I thought you thought of me. And it's well documented, it's well proven scientifically, theologically, et cetera, that human beings, and especially alcoholics, spend the bulk of their life thinking about themselves. And not only thinking about themselves, but what others think of me. And again, I had two dynamics going on. especially before I ever found King Alcohol, even afterwards, but definitely before I found King Alcohol. And the two dynamics were this: if I logged on to Zoom today, or I walked into a meeting and we were all there, two things were going on at the same time. One, I wanted everybody to come up to me and go, "Hey man, how you doing? We're good. Give me a hug, high five, fist pump me. Just let me know we're good." The other half of me wanted you to leave me the hell alone. And the kicker was I wanted you to do it at the same time, right? An unrealistic expectation. So I'm already set up for failure before I ever even get in the room. I've already lost, because of this pull for this self-centered, affirmation, so I can just feel okay. And I'm never okay. King Alcohol would level that level of intensity that mindset would put on me, and that's why I loved it so much. But even when it came off and the hangover was over, I was right back to morbid reflection and worried about what you think of me, and what you thought of me paralyzed me. It absolutely did, and it still can today if I'm not careful. If I'm not spiritually sound and spiritually centered, it can still dominate my life today. But that's the problem, So I go back and I look at this list of conflicts. Well, one of them is my Uncle Bob. Here's a great example. My dad's brother. And he's on my list because I was on that. He wasn't on my amends list initially, but he was definitely on my inventory list. And the question was, what's your conflict with Uncle Bob? Well, he was just never really in my life. Okay. Um, did you ever call him? I said, well, no, he was the adult. I was the youngster. And, I would go on all these alibis. This is part of my victimization coming on. Did you ever send him a Christmas card? No. Did you ever? No, I didn't do any of those things. Well, why not? Well, again, passing the buck back to him. Well, it's his responsibility. And well, why don't you think he did that? Well, then here's where the truth come out. Well, because he probably, and I'm thinking, well, he probably doesn't like me, doesn't want anything to do with me, all these things. So here we are, years, decades later. I haven't seen my Uncle Bob since I was about 6 or 7. Now I'm 25 years old, and I've never seen my Uncle Bob as an adult. And I got my reasons why, and they're on this piece of paper. And guess what? None of them are true. And I guarantee over a third of my resentments were that. And so when I did make amends, when my Uncle Bob was on my A-step list, I was still stuck in this victimization. I would not go back and make this amends. I had a big stack of 3x5 index cards with all my people, and Uncle Bob was on there. But every time he came to the front, he went right to the back. I had no desire to engage with this guy because I still held him accountable for our lack of relationship. And 5 years passed, and 10 years passed, and now I'm 12 years sober, and my stack of cards is really thin. And I'm in the prison one night, and because we do a lot of prison work, and I'm in the prison. We're doing a 9-step workshop, and one of the guys, and I'm talking about my hangouts with Uncle Bob, and one of the guys and one of the offenders inside says, "Man, when are you just going to shut up and do it?" And he had me, and I'm like, dude, I'm the one who comes in. This is what I come in here, I bring this, and all this stuff. You got, and I'm all rattling to myself all the way home. But I knew he was right. And the next morning, I got up and I Googled Robert Long, Betty Long, and it popped up in a town about 3 hours from me. And I wrote him a card and gave him a synopsis of what was going on. And then they sent me a card right back. And then my Aunt Betty called me and says she was so excited to hear from me. So excited to hear from me. And I said, well, Aunt Betty, I need to come and see you people in person so I can make amends. This is part of this journey I'm on. She goes, well, I don't know about all that amends stuff, but we definitely would love to see you. And I set it up and I drove there 3 hours. And this imposter narrative that had been in my mind my entire life, trying to sabotage everything about me, had sabotaged this relationship my entire life. But I had enough truth and enough faith and enough experience in my life. I'm like, hey, thanks for sharing. Now leave me alone. And I went on down, and I pulled in this little town, and I pulled down their street, Locust Street, and they lived in a 1-story little, what they call a ranch house here in the States. And they had 4-car driveway with 3 cars in it, and 1 spot for me. And I pull into the driveway, and I get out, and I look on the street, and there's cars all over the place. Cars up and down the street. I thought, man, these people got a lot of cars for being a senior couple. That's what I'm thinking. I'm nervous wreck, And I get out. My Aunt Betty comes on the front porch, and she's kind of a small country girl and a country lady. And she hollers back into the house. She's got the door open. She goes, well, he looks like a Long. And I knew I had the right house, but I'm nervous wreck. And I walk up, and my Uncle Bob, the guy that I had on my inventory list, who didn't like me, who didn't want anything to do with me my whole life. That's why he never reached out or never participated in my life, came out and grabbed my hand and stuck his hand on top of it and squeezed it firm. And he said, "Welcome home, son. Come inside. I got some people I want you to meet." And I walked inside his house, and all of his kids were there, grandkids, several cousins, probably over 30 people to welcome me back into their life. And that was many years ago, and it's been like we've never been apart ever since. My Uncle Bob has long passed away. But when he died, my Aunt Betty was adamant I sit right in the front, right next to her. And probably one of the greatest compliments she ever gave me was Little Harold is what she called me, because my dad's name is Harold. She called me Little Harold. She goes, "Little Harold, you remind me a lot of your Uncle Bob." Probably one of the greatest compliments I ever got. I tell you that story to show you the power of resentments. That resentment robbed me of that entire relationship for decades. And I can promise you, without really knowing your story, that there's lots of Uncle Bob stories sitting right here, right now, that's manifested because of twisted perceptions, self-centered fears, lots of delusion. And it's just not true. And even if parts of it are true, it's just parts of it. And if you can uncover, discover, discard, as the famous Chuck C would used to say, then you can really get free. And begin by getting free. I mean, at least what I've discovered is that, alcoholism, I really thought king alcohol was the problem, but as I stayed here, I heard it from day one that alcohol is only a symptom. I didn't really understand that. I mean, a little, maybe philosophically, but I didn't inside my soul. But today I do. Today I know definitely that we suffer from a soul sickness. And I would describe the soul as our mind, our will, and our emotions. That's how I would describe it. And I suffer from a soul sickness. And guess what? If this channel gets clogged, because this is what 10, 11, 12 is about, because life's going to happen, life on life's terms, it's going to happen. There's 4 big pillars in life. The first one we don't have any say-so in, that's birth. Fate determines that. We don't get to choose our parents, what zip code, where we start out economically in the world. We don't get to choose any of that, but we have to deal with it. And there's people on here who come from some really tough backgrounds, even tougher than mine, and they just do. And I get that. There's people here that have suffered ungodly atrocities and violence and domestic abuse and sexual. The stories are heartbreaking. And so much that happened as a child. We don't get to choose that. We don't have no say so in that. But we have to deal with it. But it's definitely here. It's definitely here. But the other 3 big pillars, we all got to deal with if we live long enough. If you live long enough, you're going to get ill. And it's not just you, but the people you care about. And you're going to watch things like cancer and heart disease and diabetes and other accidents and unforeseen things happen to people that you really care about. And it's going to get in your channel. And if you don't deal with it, guess what? The blockage happens, the spiritual separation comes back, you get sick again, and an idea of drinking becomes a reality. That's why it says that resentment is the number one offender. Conflict's the number one offender. And we're either in a conflict, coming out of a conflict, or guess what? About ready to go into another one. It's just how life happens. But if you live long enough, you're going to get ill. If you live long enough, you're going to age. And you're going to have to deal with that. Not just for you, but the people you care about. Whether it's Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, whatever. Just the inability to live independently anymore. My wife's mother is 90 years old, still lives independently. But if she lives, to be 100, these will be challenges in her life. They will be an inconvenience in your life. They will get in your crawl in your life. I can promise you they will. And then lastly, the big pillar is we're all going to die. The people that you love the most are all going to die. And some of them die long before their time. And it's heartbreaking. One of my good buddies that I was in college with, he just had his first child who passed away at 3 months old. Don't think that's in his channel. I can promise you it's in his channel. And so you have to deal with it. And so that's why resentments are the number one offender. But we create them. That's why they're so hard to get rid of, because we water them, we nurture them, we fertilize them, we even put Miracle Grow on them. We'll help them grow. And you resemble somebody because they go everywhere you go. They take showers with you, they ride to work with you, they lay in bed with you, they're with you all the time. And the sad part about it is we're the ones that create them. And the most delusional part about resentment is this is the part that kills me the most. And this is the part that's just I still find cunning, baffling, and powerful all these years later. It's like It's like having a shank. It's like somebody stuck a shank in your back and you're in intense pain. You're sitting there in pain. Everybody can see it in your face. They can see the anguish on your face. They're like, Harold, why don't you let me help you? Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. I got this. If you just turn around, I'll pull it. No, I got it, man. I'm good. I'm good. It's not as bad as it's not as bad as you think. It's going to be all right. Just still want to just manage my pain, manage my conflict, manage the resentment, manage everything about my life. And my buddy Henry said it best. I'll never forget it. He said, "My life is great when I'm not involved in it." And I've always loved that statement because it's so true. It is great when I'm not involved in my life. But guess what? I'm involved in my life. It's just part of the human experience. And so that's the challenge with resentments, as it says. And a life full of resentment, it leads to futility and unhappiness. And you've known people, I guarantee you may have some people in your own family that are like this, that they've been so bitter, and it gets way past. See, I think there's layers. There's the conflict or the resentment, but then it turns to hate, but then it gets to bitterness. And when it gets to bitterness, this is where suicide and homicide become possible. When the self-hate and the self-morbid reflection gets so deep, and two extremes happen, my ego and then the depression and the anxiety around it gets max out at the same time, then these things become possible. So when you see somebody go hostile and shoot up the town or shoot up whatever, and it's drastic and it's terrible, but if you just stepped into their life and were able to unpack how did this human being get to this point that they thought this is a good idea. Now, of course, there's a few psychopaths out there, but a lot of these are everyday people. I'm in the prison every week in a maximum security prison, had been for over 30 years. So I sit with these folks all the time. They're no different than you and I, but the resentment just went too far, and they never dealt with the resentment. And eventually there was activity in the resentment. There was drama, there was back and forth, there was toxicity, and eventually the resentment led to some pretty harsh actions, maybe even homicide or serious bodily injury. And this is where this stuff can lead to. And this is why it's poison. It's why we got to get it out of our system, and we can't afford to have it because when I got a resentment, that's all I'm thinking about for the most part. And then it'll morph into my subconscious. And then it's not even at a conscious level, but it's still affecting me. When you read step 8 and 12 and 12, it says, now we're going to redouble our efforts here. Looking at these people on our list. So to get to that subconscious emotional twist that comes up and bites us out of nowhere. We don't know why all of a sudden we're in this funk. My sponsor used to call it the blue funk. All of a sudden we got this blue funk and we have no idea why we even got it. Why you got this attitude? Why you got this uneasiness? Why are you edgy? Whatever words you want to use to describe it. But I can't put it at a conscious level. I don't know why. But it's down there. It's deep. And sometimes, professional help's needed sometimes to uncover some of this stuff. And don't be afraid to get that help if just moral inventory and working with sponsor isn't enough to break you free or get this out of your crawl, out of your channel, then go get the help you need. Whatever you go to any lengths, friends, to get this unclawed. Because once you do, here's the beautiful part about it. Because the book describes it blocks us off from the sunlight of the spirit. Easy way. If this is a piece of plyboard and I went out and laid it in the grass, if I left it there for 2 weeks and then I went and lifted it up, what color would the grass be? Well, it'd be brown and yellowish. It'd be dingy looking. But if I laid that plyboard back down and left it laying there longer, a few more weeks, and went back and pulled it up, guess what? There is no more grass. It's just bare earth. Everything died. Why? Because it was blocked off from the sunlight of the spirit. You can just look at resentments as little bitty pieces of plyboard plastered all over your soul. And there's lots of them. And it's blocked you off from the sunlight of the spirit. So those have to be removed. And the beautiful thing is that inventory gives us a way to do that. One at a time, pull these resentments out, uncover them. And then over time, refertilize the ground, replant new stuff, reharvest new relationships. And our life changes and our life starts to take off. And it's a beautiful way to live. But that process of resentments will never go away. Self will never be fully eradicated. The big pillars of life are here to stay. So we have to have a process. So the steps aren't a past tense thing. I work step for it. It's a 12 and 12 would say, is this a lifelong practice of looking at what's in the channel? So nightly reviews of just, hey, what's in here? What's going on in my life? Good, bad, and ugly. There's a lot more good today than there is ugly. It used to be the other way around. But not anymore. So this sunlight of the spirit shines in, and guess what? It starts to heal your soul. and your soul sickness starts to heal. And the beautiful part about that, and this is where step 5 really, page 75, and I'll wrap up with this. Page 75 says this, that it's at this point when I've shared everything inside this channel. It's when I've told somebody my entire life story. I've dealt with this. I've uncovered it. Now I've shared it, that most people no longer claim to have a spiritual awakening. Now they say they've had their first real spiritual experience. Why? Because the sunlight of the spirits finally hit their soul, maybe for the first time in their life. And that's the powerful, powerful part of this process. So I don't know where you're at on your journey. If you're new in the steps, don't freak out about all this stuff. This is why you need a sponsor to walk you through this journey, somebody who's done this work themselves. But if they do that, and you're willing to uncover and discover this stuff, it'll lead to a storybook life. It'll lead to a life beyond your wildest dreams. And by that, I want to close. Hey, thank you for my life. Thank you for what you do on this platform and other platforms. And that's all I got. Thanks.